when
Mm.
we grow up and we are domesticated, right? We come to learn which part of us are safe to play out and which parts of us are not safe to play out. Now, this
Mm.
is where we go into the aspects of ourselves that we develop, where we learn certain parts and aspects of ourselves aren't safe to play out. Therefore, they are being rejected from the outside world. Therefore, I have to reject them because it's unsafe to play them out.
To reason with someone is to motivate them to do or accept topics, ideas, and issues through discussion and having conversations.
This podcast is about the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with others, finding our stability in our self-worth, and how do we actually be in healthy relationships. We find this out through connection, compassion, and communication. Reach out, connect with me, like, subscribe, comment. I want to unpack whatever it is that we can to really get to the nitty and gritty of finding out how do we get better in ourselves and how do we get better in our relationships.
Welcome back to the podcast. We have another inspiring episode going a deep dive into the meaning and understanding of connections. Just what this podcast is all about. Today I'm going to be talking with Lara. She is a connection coach who specializes in really getting into the deep psyche of mind, body, and spirit when it comes to connecting back to ourselves and then connecting with others. We share such invaluable insights and practical strategies and personal stories that really bring it out together. I get pretty deep and meaningful in this one, as I normally do, but we really kind of dig into the parts that might be blocking us and blocking me. So come and have a listen. By the end of the episode, you'll have some pretty good takeaways and some nice insight into how we can get further connected within and with others as well.
All right, welcome back to the podcast. I am joined today by and with Lara. Thank you so much for being here. I am stoked to be able to connect and be with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Off screen, we'll immediately facing technical difficulties and the classic metaphor of it being, this is just how life is sometimes, and it's perfectly imperfect. And we got there in the end. So hopefully it keeps being wonderful and magical with lots of surprises as we keep talking.
That's it. It's all about the magic.
Let's jump straight in. Lara, tell me, who the hell are you and what do you do?
Yes. So I'm Lara. I'm a connection coach. And a lot of people have the question, what in the world does a connection coach do? So I help people to reconnect first and foremost to a healthy mindset, to a fulfilling love life, and also reconnecting to their spiritual side. So connection can be experienced in many shapes and forms. And the most common thing, or the first thing that we disconnect from, is ourselves. So there's always a link coming back to the self. And so I guide people through different life scenarios. So there might be people who come out of a relationship feeling lost and trying to establish a connection, a healthy form of connection with themselves. There are other cases where people would like to expand their capacity for spiritual connection. That often I found goes hand in hand with someone overcoming grief as well. That might be through a loss, that might be through an experience of, let's say, a spiritual experience that can't be named, that can't be made sense of. I help them to make sense of it. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, that's why you're here. I guess I'm very much on the same path of connection being
the first and foremost thing that we need to be able to do in order to get well, and yes, coming back to the self is totally there. So I was lucky enough to go on your podcast and talk to you about all things me. So I get to ask all the questions now. So
Yes.
why this work? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah. Huh. As so often in life, we can either put ourselves on a path or we will be put on a path. For me, it was the second, where I actually didn't come out of school and say, I want to be a connection coach. This is me. It's actually more that life found me and put me on this path. So often, there's the question, why do you do what you do? And it can be that we come out of school and we're inspired by something, or something has deeply touched us, where we draw a connection and say, this part of work is where I find myself in. It can also be a situation where we are very close to an area in our life that we had to suss out ourselves, right? It's like part of the question, why are you a psychologist, or why do you work in that area? Most of the time it's like, well, it fulfills a certain need within us, right? It's really a very selfish reason why we choose to do what we do. And our needs are to be covered within what we do. And for me, doing what I do fulfills a soul need. It fulfills a need of finding myself in the contribution of helping others. Now, we can go all the way to the other side of the spectrum and ask, what made you click to decide this is it, right? And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't the experience of like one day I was like, after everything I've been through, this is what I'm going to do because I can help other people. For me, it wasn't that straightforward or that linear of an approach. It was actually something that molded into what it is today over the past 10 years. My brand, Bliss Republic, first came out of the grounds because I wanted to help people connect to work-life balance. And this is how it all started, because I was in this corporate machine where I was working away and a lot of people alongside myself were doing the same thing. They were working away, they were stressed, and they were finding themselves in a job where they were happily, like they were not happy, they were unfulfilled, and they didn't like what they were doing. And so many people often say, I don't like my job, I need to find another job. And they try to hop onto the next job in another company and find it there, but they never find it. And so what happens is they step into the cycle of working away in a job to find the means to pay for an apartment that they live in order to go to a job that they don't like doing. And that's nonsense. That's like the definition of insanity. So we are in this cycle where we then need to break free from. And that's what I found myself doing as well. So that's then evolved from work-life balance into, what does a fulfilling life mean? And then, along with me growing and being on my path, I had to overcome, well, for me, now that I look back at it, quite big challenges that now I get to help others with, but only because of this, let's call it sophisticated wisdom I've acquired. I'm able to ask the right questions to the people I work with, to have them come onto the path of understanding where they're stuck, because I've been there, because I relate and I can mirror it back to them. So I am actually not, let's say, someone to tell people the path forward. I need them to figure that out on their own, which is a very powerful approach, as you might know, like having someone come to terms with their problem by themselves. That's where we want to get to. That's where we want people to be, wow, I connect the dots, right?
Mhm.
I can really see it now.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
yeah.
You can't integrate and transform without that. You can't live somebody else's life or somebody else's path that got them to freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of free courses and ebooks and stuff like that online. You're like, here's how you make this amount of money, and then you'll be happy. You can't live somebody else's life. You got to be the main character in your own life,
Mm,
not some side character. So I think that you're right. It's that's how they're going to get through, if they come to their own terms of things. And you kind of work similar to me. It's like you're a guide.
mm.
You help them along as they figure that out. And I guess the work that I do is those that want to do it are choosing to go down the path of resistance instead of the path of least resistance. Um,
What do you
they
mean by that?
Well, the path of resistance it's going to be way more challenging. It's going to be way harder to go and face what you need to face. Least resistance is, I will just find my worth in external shit and find my way to get to the top of the business chain, or I will just get the wife and 3 kids or whatever, and then my life will be complete, and I'll find it that way, and I'll just drink away my problems, or I'll just put things under the rug. That's the least resistance. That's essentially easy to avoid and hide. Ends up
But
being
that's not doing
very
the
hard.
work, right?
That's right. So the people that come to you are deciding that's what they want.
Yeah.
They want to, even though they don't know half the time, but that's what they're wanting to do, is connect back to them and then be able to do it.
Often people come to me because they are so stuck. They actually have entered this sort of cycle trap that they're in, and they are
Mm,
not aware that that's what it is, but they
right.
know that they end up with the same emotional outcome again and again, and
Mm,
they need help. They need to take on different perspectives. They need someone to pull them out of it and zoom out of the situation, to look at things globally, to then be able to say, right, it's way less overwhelming if I just take this little bit here and this little bit, and let's dive into that.
mm. So maybe this is a question that you can answer it in your own personal way of your own story, or you can use a client, right? It's up to you. But what leads someone to find themselves so disconnected with themselves? Like, why do they come to see you, or why did you come to a point where you realized you have no connection left within you, and you need to find a way back to that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's the hardest thing to understand if you
Yeah.
really want to wrap your head around it. And I love what you said in my podcast, is that people often come to you because they think their communication is bad. And what actually happens is they yell at each other because they feel that they're so far away. Now, this is something that happens inside of us as well. When
Mm,
we grow up and we are domesticated, right? We come to learn which part of us are safe to play out and which parts of us are not safe to play out. Now, this
mm,
is where we go into the aspects of ourself that we develop, where we learn certain parts and aspects of ourself aren't safe to play out. Therefore, they are being rejected from the outside world. Therefore, I have to reject them
mm,
because it's unsafe to play them out.
mm,
And often we think that we grew up and all these parts integrate, but they don't. So we
mm.
actually have a bunch of emotionally immature people running around who
Yeah.
don't know that parts of them are still stuck in their childhood or their teenage years,
Yeah.
where they don't accept parts of themselves the decision to not accept that part of themselves has happened a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not aware. It's not at the forefront of their mind. It's a subconscious process. So they're not aware that that happened.
Yeah.
Yet they make decisions based on it. And because
Mm-hmm.
they are in that perception, they will not choose themselves wholeheartedly.
Mm.
They will not stand up for themselves wholeheartedly. They might continue to choose the same people that will play out the scenario in the most familiar way for them that keeps them disconnected.
Yeah.
So loneliness can happen through different things, right? You can be physically isolated. You
Mhm.
can be also geographically isolated through things. Like I'm isolated from my family because I'm on the other side of the world. So there is a reason for loneliness. Loneliness can also happen because physically I'm isolated because I'm in a wheelchair and I don't have access to the same things that other people have access to. But I can deeply be internally feel lonely
Mm.
or isolated. And people who haven't integrated all the parts of themselves, which that's something you can only get to find out when you do want to do the work, when you do lean into the things that you usually don't look at, because it's uncomfortable looking at your emotions, right? It's uncomfortable to say, whoa, why am I doing this the way I'm doing it? Especially, it's especially hard when you're really not aware that that's what you're doing, but other people see it. And
Yeah.
when you get that feedback and you can't take it on as you being a angry person, right? That pushes people away. So of course it's it's that cycle trap. It's you choose your own self-abandonment in that moment. And so making people aware of that, you basically can't. You have to have them come onto the side that you're seeing so that then they can say, whoa, I see it now. I want to change that. Yeah.
And you got to be willing to hear that feedback, right?
You've got to be willing. And it's the hardest thing because, to come back to your question, it's all to do with awareness. And we are often not aware of our behaviors and emotions and thoughts that make us disconnected from ourselves.
This is what makes it so hard, as you say, I think that's a really beautiful way of describing it, though, because what I hear you say is like there's this role that we end up having to play in order to fit in the system from a young age. And then what that role demands us to do if we want to stay alive, if we want to stay in relationship or attachment, is we've got to potentially drop what is our true authentic self. It sounds like that we disconnect from being who we are in order to be who we're not, but that means we might be able to stay safe in the relationship.
Yes.
And that if it's unconscious, which a lot of the time it is, because it happens at such a young age, that by the time we keep fucking repeating the same old shit and getting the same old results, by the time we keep facing ourselves in another shitty relationship, yet so familiar that we go back into those roles, and eventually we find ourselves, why am I so lost? And I think this is probably a nice segue to my next question, is to be able to reconnect with yourself. You have to, you can't do that if you have a lot of shame.
Yeah.
So how do you move through shame? And I guess it's like you learn a long time ago to play this role, and then being true, bringing in the true self, being in that authentic, connected version of you, you go, that's bad. This is wrong. This is not good enough when I'm this way. So we learn that to be authentic, to put our boundaries in place, all these sort of things is not good, is means that we're not lovable. So we don't put it back where it belongs. We make it ours, and we keep shaming ourselves. So how do you bring someone into the light and start to connect towards themselves when they think that they are wrong, or they are bad, or they are undeserving?
Well, let me pick a few things here that have been said.
Sorry.
So I guess one of the things that I want to point out is that we're not born having to set boundaries, right? We're born having to adapt to other people's boundaries. So when we grow up, we are being put in a situation where other people put their needs on us. It's not that they have always our needs and values as a child at heart. Best example, you bring a child into a fine restaurant. You're actually there because you're fulfilling your needs. It's not a place for a child, right? The child will scream, and what will you do? You scold them to be quiet because it's uncomfortable to you. Now, the child is being taught, I am not loved and not safe and not seen, and will be rejected if I will be yelled at or screamed at, or, if I am not composing myself within the needs of the other person. So I want to say that coming back and out of shame always means you need to take that construct of all these things that have been put onto you out of your life and come back to being a child. Now that's the easiest way to saying it, right? Who you were to before all of that happened, the real you. And I love the example. Now this is I'm going to be mindful how I'm going to phrase this, but it's those two kids coming together, a boy and a girl, and it's that sort of innocence of a pants down moment, right? It's like, I show you mine, you show me yours. All right, all right. I'm going to navigate this field, okay? Because it doesn't make any sense, but it's the sort of, I see you fully, and this is who you are. This is what you look like. It's fully being seen as you are. Shame comes in when we're not okay with fully being seen how we are. When we put adaptations in place that help us to be accepted without having to have a pants down moment, right? It's when, let's say, we learn that if I get to always be nice to someone, and I get to always be the good boy to my mother, and that means I'm going to buy her things, I'm being generous to other people, I'm seen in a certain light, that gives me what I need, because people will not reject me and they will love me for it, right? So that's an adaptation. You will start manipulating people because eventually you go down the road of, the more I do that, the more my needs are being met, right? And so this is just one example. Where you feel shame in that situation, in that scenario, is, will people still love you and accept you if you don't do it? If you don't play out that adaptation, if you don't play your magic card that you know how to do so well, if you are plain, if you're the person you are without the doing, or who you identify yourself to be, if you're just coming back to the little child who's like, this is me, in full innocence,
Yeah.
then you get to see who's really loving you for who you are and there's no shame, because where innocence is, shame can't live.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of things that you have to uncover, and it's individual with every person, because everyone has their own trap cycles that they are caught up in, their little knots that they build with things in their lives, their canvas, and you want to come back to a clean canvas with them as much as possible, right? Or also integration can happen when the parts on that canvas, that the pieces that don't fit together, find new harmony in a new painting, in a new way.
That's a nice free frame, right? Because there's some things that, because of my experiences, I went down a path of doing things that I am ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
And there are moments where, because of my role that I need to play, because I wasn't willing to have fully expose myself and put my needs, really on the line, and I would sort of not want to get left alone, for example, then I would, like, that was unbearable to have to be like, are you going to accept me or not? It wasn't an option. I would be like, you have to accept me, otherwise I will fall apart. So there's times in my timeline that and yes, I've done a lot of the work on myself, but just let's say I haven't, that my shame would, there's going to be marks on that canvas that I cannot get rid of, but I can find a way to integrate them back into a way that makes them be okay with the puzzle canvas that I'm trying to piece them in that way back together. Does that make sense? I guess it's like, I find a way to make peace with the things that I did because of how unwilling I was and unable I was to move past this idea that others may think of me in a certain way, or others might not love me for who I am.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
These parts that you're not accepting, would you accept them in another person?
I accept them in another person all the time.
And the reason for you to reject them within yourself, is that reason something that is valid?
There's a part that makes it valid, I guess.
Okay. So I guess this is a point where I would have to know a little bit more detail. If this was a scenario with a client, I would probably have to know a little bit more detail. But since we're on a podcast, I'm not putting you in a situation.
Let's figure out how I can share without. Yeah, I mean, let's do it. Let's do it. I guess I'll preface it by saying I have done a lot of work, but there's still shadows that exist, right? I will use one as an example where I do get really triggered, and logically, I've done what we're talking about. But when I'm in those moments, it doesn't matter how much I know. I can go into this space. When I get angry, anger is such a part that I reject because of what it can do internally to me, which really is my fear and anxiety, and anger is just to protect me from that, right? And
I reject it because I hate what it can do to others. And I am very ashamed of my anger in those moments where there's definitely times in my past that I regret. And then when that happens, even if it's not happening in the same volatile way, when I'm triggered, I can definitely still get, those moments of being ashamed of myself for sure. Not liking that I do that. Really rejecting this idea that this exists still within me.
All right. So the first thing that comes up for me is what you resist persists, right?
Mhm.
So, how do you move through your emotions, Jackson?
In what way? Do you mean when I'm in that state? When I'm really triggered?
No, actually, when you come out of it and you know, oof, that thing again. And what now?
Look, for the purpose of this, I will tell you one version of it, right? And I have other versions, but there are times where I will beat the shit out of myself. The fact that I just did that, the fact that I just got angry again. That's probably the message. You did this again. How are you still able to get that? How is that still able to come here?
All right. I want to actually acknowledge the fact that thanks for sharing that because there's something really important to be said here for everyone who's listening. A lot of people believe that ignoring an emotion makes it disappear. And that is actually the discipline of self-abandonment by not being with your emotion and validating your own experience. It's almost like people who, like what you said earlier, the people who will try to run away from their emotions in alcohol and all these sort of other distractions and not really, and say, no, you cannot like suppress the emotion. You cannot be that way, right? So, all right, then what's on the other side of that? On the other side of that is validating your own experience, saying, all right, this is what's coming up. This is something I want to deal with. Am I ready for it? Yes, no, maybe, right? And if you're like, yeah, head on, full on, let's get this anger sorted, right? And then there are different modalities. I think one of the things that have worked for me incredibly well is to manage my emotion. And I don't mean manage them by putting them away, but managing by actually looking at them, being with them, feeling them, embracing them, which is the opposite of running from them, actually leaning into it. And there's several studies done. I mean, one of the first people that made me realize this was by Dr. Hawkins, David Hawkins, in the book Letting Go. Highly recommend it. He said an emotion fully expressed can't stay in our body and physical experience for longer than, I think he said something about 15 minutes. Now, there's another study done that... and it says there was a study done that it doesn't take longer than 90 seconds present in your body to feel and release and leave the body. So this is the study by Harvard-trained brain scientist Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor. Now, personally, I think it takes a bit longer than just 90 seconds, but I really love to, and I think I said that on your podcast as well, where I was at the airport and I was just like crying my eyes out. I was like, this is coming, this feeling it. And it's almost like that's the moment of vulnerability. That's the moment of innocence where you don't control the emotion. You don't identify with the emotion in a way where you let the emotion determine whether or not it gets to be felt. It's almost like we try to control things
Mm.
a lot,
Mhm.
but surrendering to your emotion and saying, all right, I am actually in control because I let you free roll or free run for the next 5 minutes because I can know you're pressing. I know this anger is coming up. It's there. I feel it. And then having the courage and strength to say, I'm going to let it out now. I will explain myself later to everyone who's around. Or, as to your approach, which I also like, is to say, am I safe for myself? Because I don't want to get into an overwhelmed state. But to actually say, it's right now. This is happening. I'm not able to schedule this. I'm not able to schedule my emotion.
Yeah.
I am going to feel this now. I'm going to go in the car and I'm going to have a big scream and I might break some shit. This needs to come out. And then take the time to sit and feel the emotion. And then one of the things that have helped me a lot is to go into the layers of the emotion. Now, this is what a lot of people are deeply afraid of. This is where fear comes in, where a lot of people are like, all right, sitting here, I'm feeling the anger and I've just let it all out and I screamed and I feel this heat coming up in my body. What's underneath this? Like, let me drop deeper into the next layer of my subconscious. What's the memory coming up? And takes a certain skill that you can only learn by experience to take yourself through that and know what are the questions to ask to prompt my subconscious to have the right answers come up.
Mm.
And when you're in that space of, all right, under my anger, there's actually a sadness and disappointment. And I'm feeling that. And I lean into that emotion and I feel it. And I'm just everything under the umbrella of the knowledge that you're doing this for you.
Mm.
Because the overall goal is to manage your anger. Now, you're leading yourself through that process and you're in the process of, right, there's frustration, there's disappointment, there's sadness, and I'm feeling this. I'm just going to have a big cry. What's under that? And you drop deeper and deeper for every conditioning and the emotion that is bound to it, that we get triggered with. There's a different letter or string of emotions attached to it. And the beauty, now this goes into consciousness work. The
Yeah.
beauty of this, the deeper we go, we will come out at the tail end of that string of emotions. And we've gone through anger, sadness, disappointment, betrayal, feeling hopelessness, feeling all of these things. And this is very individual, right? And you come out of that and you feel that hopelessness and you come out of that and you're like, what's underneath that? And at every tail end, it always comes back to love. Always does.
Not having love?
No, the moment you fully express your emotions, in the moment you take time to step through that process, which that's something that you can have practitioners help you through as well. There's a lot of somatic trauma informed coaches who can help you
Yeah.
with that. There are different. I'm not sure if I've ever come across it in a CBT based session.
Yeah, no.
Probably
Not
not.
really. They can't go that deep,
Probably
right?
not.
But, you're right. But you're doing it with me right now, so no one else is here. I guess it's that, I mean, I work that way. And I think what you're saying, and correct me if you think this isn't quite it, but this is where I think you get down to those layers when you start to get to helplessness, you will find that it comes back to how you see you. And that is a shame-based thing. once you dig through enough emotion, that bottom layer is shame. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. This is what's just happened to me. And that's that shame core feeling. I agree with you. I think love comes after that, because if you've allowed yourself to get through what's underneath that, you're helpless, then you're powerless, then you're, this is where it started. This is where it came from, which is something took away this inherent worthiness that I have as a being. And that
Yeah.
moment made me think that I wasn't worthy.
Yeah.
Being with that, I mean, if we can, this is the part where we're kind of talking about it, if you can get through the shame and then decide to treat you like you'd treat anyone else that was saying that they are unlovable, is you would give them love.
Yeah. And
Then
this
you'll
is
feel the
where,
love.
yes. And this is where we often say our heart breaks, but it actually breaks open because then we're able to receive.
Yeah.
The barrier falls away. We remove it. It's all about removing the barriers.
Mm. Interestingly, you heard what I was saying about it being good because I name it. And there's a part of me that does, right? And like that was probably the other part where it's easier to work with. The part that I was describing is actually how much I hate me. So I'm naming how much I hate that I did that. And I'm actually immediately starting with shaming myself. So I'm immediately going, I am going to beat myself up. And then I stay on the surface. I don't go any deeper in that space because I won't allow myself to go deeper because I'm just beating the shit out of sabotaging myself, hating myself in that moment, which won't let me drop in further and further and further because I'm like, this is how I want to show up for me, is I want to go, you're a bad boy again. And I want to repeat all the shit that I've had and just confirm, yeah, this is that really, really old belief. The other part, which I want to step into more, is what mostly happens these days, which is beautiful, is yeah, honoring it, accepting it, sometimes feeling it, and then going through those deeper layers. And most of the time, yeah, finding that self-love and compassion again, which I think is the ultimate step into proper integration. But naturally, and this is why I like sharing my reality, this still happens. I've been in therapy for 8 years, and there's still parts of me that want to join the shame bandwagon. It's a lot less, and I'm very good at managing my emotions, but there's still something that exists. Do you think there's a possibility? This might stir some feathers, I guess, but can we be fully healed of and fully rid of our triggers and our shame?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
But I do believe this goes into a space that is almost a little bit more mystic and a little bit more on the spiritual side of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said at the start of this, you drop people into their spiritual connection within themselves. So,
yeah,
what would
right.
that be?
Okay, so I believe that there are scenarios where we can do all the conscious work and it all makes sense. We do it again and again. And we use our tools and skills and so on. But what you're doing in that moment, when that comes back and you start beating yourself up again, you go back to what's familiar, right?
Yeah.
And familiar is not necessarily just all the way to our childhood. Sometimes this goes into ancestral trauma. This goes into, let's just say, DNA. You're encoded in a certain behavior and way. There's a beautiful, not beautiful at all. There's a story of this guy who was a mass murderer, killed a bunch of people. And they looked at his family history and childhood trauma. There's nothing they could find. And like he was in jail, he had a therapist and everything. And they looked at his parents, were the most loving, caring people, and gave him everything. There was nothing where they could find anything.
Crazy,
And
right? There's no way.
there's nothing. And you're just like, this should be the nicest person, but he killed some people. And they go back into the grandparents' history. Again, super nice people, everything in order. They came overseas, had to do a bunch of things. Then, like, I think 5 generations back, grandfather, mass murderer. Yeah. So there is something there that can't be outruled, right? And so let's just say we're born into this world, not only, let's say, well, we are innocent in our temper, in our being, but there is a certain framework with what we can use with the DNA and the encoding, the ability of the encoding that is within us, right? Let's just say, simplest thing, I want to be 1.80 meters, right? I'll never be that because my DNA has already dictated within me that that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So there's a limitation. It's the same for some of the genetic behaviors and defaults that can be passed on. Don't have to be, but can be passed on. And so now, to come back to your example, let's say there are sometimes things, and I like describing them as hooks in our soul that are so deep. And I had to remove some of them myself in my own story, coming from no one else but my ancestors. And I go in a very spiritual approach with that. I pray and I say, guys, you left that here, you come back and help me, right? And I say, show up, I need you. And it's okay. Like, they want us to ask for help, actually. Now, there are hooks that will want you to step back into what's familiar. Because I was safe for so long, so long, longer than you existed. So sometimes we need to look at it from, well, maybe it's not my fault that I'm that way, even if I've tried everything in my lifetime. Right? And so that could be something to ask yourself, like, what if all that weight of the anger that I'm carrying, how I'm beating myself up, isn't actually just mine to carry?
Well, I already know that it isn't. I don't have to go too far back to know where it comes from.
So
but
it would
I
be
know
unfair.
Hey, what?
You keep going. It
I
would
know.
be unfair to reject wholeheartedly all of that within you, because you would then have to also reject it within all the other people it comes from. Does that make sense?
The part that I always think about is that it didn't start with you, right? It has to have come from somewhere. We're not born this way. The epigenetics, I guess, is more like what's passed on and what's familiar and all that sort of stuff. And it can go back, and the research is starting to show that as well, which is really, really cool. But you set an example of, like, you got to call upon everyone involved to help you move through it. What are some other ways of because that's some different type of connection work, right? So what else might that look like for someone to maybe step into if they wanted to do that?
If someone wanted to do that, and I think it does take a very solid approach of having done the work, and I think where let's just say where you're at, you've already looked at all the tools available to you in order to move through the schemas you're at, the traumas that your childhood wounding, reparenting yourself, all of these things, let's just say, and it keeps coming back up, right? Because, and you do want to resolve that as well, because it comes, it otherwise it isolates you from people, and
Totally. It has
you don't,
consequences.
yeah. So if you're at that point where you feel everything is done that I know of, and I now want to lean into, let's say, the non-obvious, not subconscious, but metaphysical realms,
Yeah.
right? There's different approaches. Well, there's first and foremost what I believe as well. You can do a lot of reading. Self-education can help us a lot of times to process things, even when it's about the ancestral line and lineage. But it might be literature that we don't usually look for, right? So,
True.
yeah, there's other ways of coming into that, because there is somatic work, there is work with the body to connect with that has been come to this earth by your ancestors, right? So it's also within this that you can access it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then obviously meditation in the mind, because you are able to connect your mind through other realms of space and time, which is what you need to be able to open to that way of healing, to that way of connecting. This is often where people that I work with, they come to a point where their prefrontal cortex has reached the limit, and they come to a point where, and I like saying that way because of, yeah, being a bit more scientific based, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, your frontal lobes are in charge of your spatial awareness. Often people who access their frontal lobes and their pineal gland are then able to access this other knowledge that's out there for us. And that is where really spiritual experiences happen. And once you come to that limit within your own mind, that's where you open up to, well, I'm at the edge right now. What else is beyond the edge, right? And you get curious, and you will find different ways. And I do believe that it's also a good way to reconnect with your intuition. And then it's almost like access to the things that you're open to will find you as well, because it's a different level of work where you find the things that want to find you, if that makes sense. Because now you come to a point where authenticity plays a huge role, because you're already at the point where you know yourself, that you say, I'm that authentic that I know my anger has become an issue that I want to deal with, and or I want to manage, and I've tried everything, and now I'm open to handing that over. And in that realm of the metaphysical, there's only really two forces. There is push and pull. Now, the funny thing is that often we try to reach something, but the more we try to push for it, we push it away. Reaching that level of connection as well, I think it's very important, because that's where true love can be grasped, because it's the one thing you can't put your finger onto. Because the more you try to pull it in, the more you push it away. It's the thing where you're in a state of connection where consciousness, your higher power of consciousness happens. And the moment you think you have it, you step into your ego conscious and you lose it. It's a really nice play that's worth mastering. But to come back to your question, what are other ways? There's so many ways. There's an abundance of ways. That's the thing. It's like this is really a realm where the
Yeah,
offering is limitless.
I guess it depends on what you're getting curious around and what your intuition maybe moves you more towards, and how open and willing you are to different experiences.
And it's very individual because no
Yeah.
matter where you're at, what your problem is, what you want to solve with the intention that you have. You may say, I want to stop my anger because I don't want to hurt people, because that's really like, it hurts me to see how I hurt other people with that anger.
Mm-hmm.
But it might also be that you say, my intention is to fast forward, stop that anger, because if I have children one day, I don't want to expose them to that, because that's really
Yeah.
not not where I want to be. So it's like, what's the intention? That's a different frequency. So that's got a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's really cool. I became a Reiki practitioner and master when I was much
I'm
younger.
I'm most likely doing my certification in September, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's interesting that it always comes back up, because I stopped practicing when I was young because I was still being a rat bag, and I probably wasn't really ready for that level of power and energy coming through. And I went to Bali by myself, and I was doing some really intensive stuff pretty early on in my career, probably before I was even registered as a therapist. And I think there was just this like alignment and then misalignment and then alignment and then misalignment. And it's interesting how I keep getting called back to it, but it's like there's this thing, like in everything. Whenever I have conversations like this, I'm like, I gotta get back. It's pulling me back. I just gotta, face it, accept it, drop into it. And I think everyone else is, not to make it all about me, but whether it's Reiki, whether it's something that's pulling you in a way of like, you need to go deeper than this. This is more than what it is. You've done the work. You keep looking at different things, like, you raise your hairs up to the things that make you really uncomfortable, or, different things. It's like, okay, well, pause and get curious about that. And maybe it's worth now, when the time is right, when the time is not right, and there's a certain pull, that you move in on it. And it's interesting that always comes back up. It's like, fuck, I should probably get back into my Reiki. And my meditation took a long time to get back into. And I think my spirituality is something that I keep coming back to, that I always want to find more in. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be there. I think there just becomes a natural element of it with the more work that we do on ourselves, where whether it's gratitude, whether it's just wonderful abundance and acceptance of like, how the fuck am I here, sort of realm of thinking, is that it in whatever way it looks, it's like there's just a more alignment with just being and existing in this world. And I think that can come with, as you're saying, all these different types of exploration from there. Not just fucking ayahuasca and mushroom trips. It's deeper and bigger in what it can be, even just through meditation and deepening connection in a way that you're going to get love that you were never going to get unless you were there as well. So yeah.
Have you ever done ayahuasca?
Not yet. I was in South America doing a lot of other stupid shit, where if we did end up doing it, it wouldn't have been safe. We were probably not in a spirit. I was very young. I was like 21, 22, 21, no, 20. I was 20 in South America. So I don't think it would have been therapeutic, put it that way. And I wouldn't have gotten what I needed to get from it. But I wouldn't do it in Australia. I don't think there's enough practitioners that are qualified, and obviously it's illegal, that I'd want it to be a really sacred ceremony. And yeah, I always question a lot of that stuff around the tribes and whether or not that's the best practice. But yeah, I mean, I'm very open. It's just about, as you say, move through the blocks to be able to go, I'm a little kid again and I can do whatever I want and I don't give a fuck who's looking at me. And then moving on it. It's probably the only things that stop me with certain things, whatever blocks there are. This has got me thinking a lot. I'm glad that
sorry.
No, it's good. No, it's good. Sometimes I'm just in the moment and I go, nah, let's dig it a bit deeper, because it just shows me who you are as well. And I'm a well enough man and skilled enough therapist and regulated enough human being that I can move through things in curiosity and stuff. So I do appreciate that we can showcase how we can move with our connection and our push and pull as well. So that's it's just really cool, and I feel very grateful that we went where we went.
I actually want to talk about something because you just gave me a buzzword, sacredness, and what that means to healing. Because I think one of the things you said is you want to explore.
Sorry.
Are you okay to continue?
I think so.
You have
I don't
time?
remember what alarm that was, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to continue until you shut me down.
Yeah. Let's go.
So you mentioned that you want to expand the ability to maybe even integrate spirituality into your work, into your life. And
Totally.
so,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I think the more work we do and the more we take off those layers of who we are not and get to understand who we are, and then come back to that pureness. I don't think there's a total way to come back to innocence, but I think to the level of pureness within us, where we know who we are, we know what we're capable of, we know that we're this person who has anger at this point, and that's something we're working on, and that's okay. And being in full acceptance of that, we will also start protecting that from people who aren't able to show up for that any longer, because that's the past. That's what we experienced before, right? Those are the people that would only accept us the way we used to be.
Yeah.
Therefore, a lot of people fall away when we change and go through transfers or transitions, because we are now fully able to accept us the way we are, and we no longer look for acceptance in the other person. Now, sacredness has been such a fun, interesting, and important word that comes up for me about choice. And it's almost like I hold my self-acceptance sacred to the point, like now I do, to the point that I'm going to sit with myself and validate if what you're saying about me being a certain way and not being okay with that is valid or not. And that's the sort of self-regulation, the emotional maturity, right?
Sure.
Now, sacredness also, in a combination of especially relationship, is an interesting one. And I feel as if, and this is hard because it's a bit judgmental for me to say, but I feel as if only the person who have met themselves so deeply and understand who they are and their fight for who they are, or they're ready for fighting for to defend themselves on who they are, because they're okay with themselves and they don't even have to. But it's almost like people who don't do the work don't get the concept of what sacredness means. What are the areas in their life that are sacred? What are topics that are sacred? What are people in their life that are sacred to them? You know? And I think it's something in our society that gets degraded more and more, and even through certain aspects in our society. I think it's a shame that this is actually happening.
So within that, because you're right, society has a way of taking us out of where we want to be, maybe. Within all of that, what to you is
still able to make its way through of being really sacred? What is that? What is still sacred for you? What do you keep as that real?
I've learned things that are close to my heart are sacred to me. And I need to learn and be clear on what that is. And I'll give you an example. I had once a story that had to do with my grandparents that have both passed now. And I just kept telling the story because it was very spiritual, very connected, very almost like one of those stories that, well, it was like a real life event that happened, but it was almost supernatural. Like you couldn't explain it unless you are connected to your ancestors in a past life, right? Now, I could tell you the story, but I won't because it's sacred to me. And I've learned that everything has a frequency. And the moment I would put it online to the internet, other people have access to putting their frequency and judgment into that. Now, their frequency pollutes the frequency that I'm holding towards the very thing that I hold so dear to my heart. Therefore, the frequency will change. And I might stop thinking about it, and I might stop, and it's something that then gets out of my control in a way of like protecting it. So it's up to me if I protect it or not, but
Yeah.
it's sacred. Same for relationships. Certain aspects in a relationship are sacred to me, right? And so I don't share that with other people, but that one person between who I share that sacred bond with.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, it's a nice way to explain it, I think. And that's what I wanted to know. So that's really cool. I've loved talking to you.
We should do more of these.
I could talk to you a lot, yeah. And I'm sure we will keep talking. But I know you have moved on from Sydney. So if people want to now reach out or connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so basically on my Instagram, it's bliss_republic, and website is blissrepublic.org.
Okay. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. And what's going on at the moment for you? Where is things
Well,
at?
I hit the big reset button. I moved up to Byron Bay, and there's a big life shift for me happening at the moment. So I'm really excited, but I'm also in a space of fully trusting that the universe has put me on this path, and we're collaborating is the right way of saying that.
Yeah, no, that's a great way.
And I'm excited to see what happens out of that. But I'm also I'm open for an intake of clients at the moment, and I've launched my connection code online training. So for people to come back to themselves, reconnect to themselves, overcome loneliness, or overcome the cycle they're in, is a good way to start. The connection code on blissrepublic.org.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely put all that out there, and we will see what the beautiful world and the universe has in store for you and in store for us as we keep connecting and stuff as well. I really appreciate you coming on, Lara, and I'm glad and very excited for everybody else to hear what we had to say today.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jackson.
Cool.
Do you want to find out more about how therapy can help you kick some goals? Go check out findreasontherapy.com.au or the Find Reason Therapy Instagram page.